everybody, and welcome to Engaging Everyone, a presentation about virtual event accessibility. My name is Jules Good, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. So a little bit about me. I am a late deaf person, and I have faced a lot of accessibility barriers in life as I'm losing my hearing, as I'm getting older. And so I'm really passionate about accessibility and helping people be able to access, community events, work events, social things, professional things. And so that's why I'm so excited to be here with you today to chat with you about how you can make your virtual events more accessible. I'm also the founder and consulting lead at an organization called Neighborhood Access. And this is our whole goal, is to work with organizations to make sure that their practices are accessible to people with disabilities. So why should you make your event accessible? First off, disabled people, just like anybody else, care about things and want to get involved in their communities and their professional networks and all of these networks where virtual events would pop up, right? Which is pretty much anywhere. But our needs are often overlooked, even though we have a lot of valuable perspectives to share. And when our access needs are overlooked, that makes it so that we aren't able to participate as fully in events. And that can even discourage people from showing up to events in the first place. And that can just be a super frustrating experience. So you want to make sure that your events are accessible, not only to get more people to your event, but also to make sure that everybody there can participate fully. And lastly, there are more of us than you think. The CDC estimates that 1 in 5 people in the United States has some kind of disability. While not all of those disabilities necessitate accommodations in the virtual world, a lot of them do. And by holding virtual events, you're already meeting some access needs in the first place for people who aren't able to go out and attend events in person. So this is really just about optimizing your virtual events so that everybody can participate fully and have a really great time without all of the frustration and headache of having to, worry about whether things are going to be accessible. So something that I really like to do when scheduling events is to think about accessibility on a timeline. So you want to think about the things you need to do a couple weeks before the event, maybe the week of the event, and then during the event. So those are kind of the 3 chunks that we're going to go through together right now. So at least 2 weeks from your event, you're going to want to pick a platform that has a dial-in option. And what I mean by that is when somebody is viewing the link to the event, you want to make sure that there's an option for them to use a phone number that's connected to the event invitation to dial in with a cell phone, landline, whatever. The reason we want to do that is because a lot of people use relay systems, which are essentially systems that allow people to dial in a captioner or an interpreter to a meeting. So you should absolutely be scheduling an interpreter and or captioner for your meeting. But if something happens in a pinch where, you just have this event randomly pop up and there's no time, then you want to make sure you have that dial-in option so that folks can utilize those relay services. Another really simple thing you can do is ask this question on your event registration page or on the RSVP. Are there any accessibility tools we can provide to ensure you are able to participate fully in this event? And what that does is it just allows you to get a really general idea of what kind of accommodations people are going to need. And that's just really helpful in your planning. For really large events, I would say that, all of these tools that we're about to go through, you should follow just as the standard because you never know who's going to show up. For small events, if you know exactly who's going to be there and exactly what their needs are from asking this question, then, there might be certain things that you can forego if it's just something really tiny. But these are all just really good things to keep in mind in general, because again, you never know if some random person is going to show up who has an accommodation that you didn't plan for. And so it's good to just plan for it and be ready to deliver on that accommodation if necessary. Another thing you need to do a couple weeks out from your event is schedule an interpreter and or a captioner. So there's kind of a hierarchy of these things that I like to think about. If you're able to schedule an interpreter and a captioner, you absolutely should. The only thing that really limits organizations from doing both is budgetary restrictions. But if you're able to do both, you totally should, because both are really helpful. The reason why is because a lot of people think that English and ASL, American Sign Language, are the same language. They're not, they're really different. ASL has its own grammar, its own structure, its own syntax. And so people who grew up with ASL as their primary language might have a harder time reading captions at the speed that speech is being delivered. So having an interpreter is really helpful to provide full access, especially to culturally deaf people. And then on the flip side of that, captions are really helpful for people who don't know sign language, but are still hard of hearing or might have some other kind of auditory processing disorder. And so you really want to have both to cater to the widest range of needs possible. If you can't, I would say second from having both would be just having the captions, because a lot more people can benefit from captions. And then for whatever reason, if you can't find captions at all and you're only able to get an interpreter, then of course that would be kind of at the bottom of the list. Absolutely, it's better than nothing and will help people, no matter what. So you should definitely do that if that is your only option. But if you can do both, that would definitely be what I would suggest. Moving to 1 week out from the event. So this is really all about formatting your materials and preparing them so that they are optimized for accessibility. So the first thing you should do is prepare to share your slides or your documents or any visual aids with attendees. In some situations, it may not be possible to share these prior to the event, but if you can, you absolutely should. The reason that this is really helpful is for people who use screen readers. So a screen reader is a piece of software that blind and low vision people use in order to have text that is on a screen read to them out loud. So it's like the opposite of speech to text that we use on our phones. It's text to speech. And so this is a really important tool for people to give them access to any text or anything that you would read on a screen. And so the issue with having slides or documents, if you're screen sharing them on a teleconferencing platform, is that the screen reader doesn't recognize what's on the video as being text. It just says, oh, that's a video. I don't have to read anything to whoever's using me because there's no text here. So when you are able to share slides and documents ahead of time, then people can use their screen readers. They'll know what to prepare for it. They'll have full access to the materials. They won't have to play catch up after the fact. So it's great to just be proactive with accessibility in that regard. Another thing that's important when you're formatting your visual materials is to add alt text, which is sometimes also called image descriptions. So this is also a screen reader related accommodation. So when a screen reader comes across a picture on your screen, unless there's alt text, it just says, oh, there's a picture. I don't have to do anything with that. And then the person using the screen reader doesn't have access to whatever is in that image. So when we add alt text, it basically sends a message to the screen reader that says, hey, this is what's in this picture. So let's do an alt text practice with this picture of me and my dog here. So if I were to add alt text to this image, I would say, this is a picture of a small black chihuahua curled up on a person's lap, and they are maybe sleeping. So super simple. You're just giving an idea of what's going on in the image. Doesn't have to be super, super detailed. Notice I didn't talk about, the pattern on my shirt or what's going on in the background. It's just an idea of whatever the most important content of that image is. The next thing you're going to want to do is format your materials with headings and proper fonts. So obviously this is for materials that have text associated with them. So if you have long documents, you want to make sure that those have headings, and not just headings that you make by hitting, Control B and making something bold or italicized or whatever, but headings that are selected from your word processor's settings to say like, oh yeah, this is heading 1, this is heading 2, this is normal text, this is a subheading, yada, yada, yada. And that is helpful for screen readers in terms of understanding the organization of the page so that it can read to the person using the screen reader a lot more coherently and not have it just be like a random stream of words. And with fonts, what we want to consider is serif versus sans serif fonts. So serif fonts are fonts like Times New Roman or Gothic that have, those little lines kind of at the edge of each part of the letter. And sans serif fonts would be fonts like the ones on this slide that don't have any of those little lines. So it's just like the simplest kind of smoothest form that the letter can be in. And the reason it's important to use sans serif fonts is because the serif can make it more difficult for people, particularly people with visual processing disorders like dyslexia, to discern between letters. It makes it easier for things to kind of get jumbled together when we have all those extra lines. So the cleanest, most sans serif font that you can find is going to be the best way to go. Another thing that you should do is provide the interpreter with a list of key terms. I know with all of our tech meetings and our industry specific terms, there's a lot of jargon in there that sometimes we don't even think about. And you want to make sure that any of those acronyms, those proper nouns, names, any really technical language, you are giving the interpreter a heads up of the kind of language that you're going to be using. So just like a list of those words, super easy. And that way they're able to prepare for that ahead of time, practice finger spelling, any words that are like super long or complicated, or maybe finding the signs for words that aren't as commonly used. So that is just going to be super helpful for your interpreter in the meeting. And lastly, as you're setting the agenda for your meeting, you're going to make sure that you're scheduling breaks into the event. So I like to follow the 35 rule, which means that for every 30 minutes of, lecture style presentation, like right now where I'm like just kind of talking at you, that you provide a 5-minute break after each of those 30-minute segments. And, it's not always possible to follow this. And I understand that different schedules and different agendas call for different things, but just try to scatter a couple short breaks throughout your event. This is not only good for people who might struggle with attention, people like me with ADD, who just have a really hard time sitting still, but also for folks who have maybe medical needs that come up throughout the day, or bathroom related needs where, they're just going to need a little bit of time to just do that self-care, make sure that they've got, all their medication and all of that stuff figured out, so that they are at the top of their game for the duration of your event. And lastly, we have the things you should do during your event. So the first of these would be audio cues, and these kind of come into two forms. The first would be your initial introductions, and the second is throughout the event. So in the initial introductions, you just want to give a quick visual description of yourself. And what this does is it helps people who are blind or low vision just kind of have some verbal thing to remember you by other than the sound of your voice. So when I say like, oh, hey, it's Jules talking, they can be like, oh yeah, that's the person who said they were wearing a yellow blazer. Like I kind of remember, how to distinguish them from somebody else. And so the initial introduction, you just want to say like, this is how I would do mine if I was in a meeting right now. Hi, I'm Jules. I have brown hair. I'm white. And I am wearing a yellow blazer with a green shirt underneath and some rainbow colored earrings. Any of what you want to say in that visual description is optional and up to you. But if you can just give, a quick overview of what you look like, any kind of key accessories or whatever you're wearing, that is really helpful for folks. And then the other type of audio cue is what you do during the event. So this is not only helpful to blind and low vision folks because, keeping track of the sound of everybody's voice, especially if you've just met them, is really difficult. So when you're switching between speakers, just make sure that you reintroduce yourself real quick when it's your turn to speak again. So it's helpful in that regard. And then it's also helpful for folks who are using interpreters, because then the interpreter can say, oh yeah, that's Jules talking, or oh yeah, that's Dan talking, or whoever, so that the person who's relying on the interpreter for communication can also have an easier time keeping track of who's speaking at what time. Another thing that's really important is content warnings. So these are especially important because there are certain visuals or sounds that can trigger people to have different reactions, even as serious as triggering a seizure or a panic attack or something that is just really not going to be a fun time when you're on screen with a bunch of different people. So there are kind of 3 things that you definitely want to make sure you include content warnings for. If you have any visuals that have flashing lights, like a really commonly known one is strobes, but just kind of flashing lights in general, any rapidly transitioning graphics. So if you're like going through a, slideshow of photos at like 1,000,000 miles an hour or something, you want to make sure you put a content warning for that. And then also any sudden and especially sudden loud noises. those can be really bothersome for folks. So just a couple minutes before those things happen, or even, give people a 10-second countdown before those things happen, is really just going to help to keep the participants of your meeting safe. And while we often don't think about safety in terms of, maybe virtual events, this is definitely an area where safety is really important. Another thing you should do is to prepare for interpreter questions. So, sometimes your internet might cut out, or there's some background noise that's like making it hard to understand what you're saying. The interpreter is going to cut in and say, hey, I didn't understand what you said. Can you repeat that? And that's because they want to make sure that, the person who's relying on the interpreter for communication has full access to the information that's being relayed. Just prepare for those questions related to clarification, because that's really going to be helpful for the folks who are relying on the interpreters. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're describing visual elements verbally. So let's do an example of that together right now. So if I was going to describe this graph in a way that a blind or low vision person could understand it, I would say this is a pie chart that shows the number of points that each team scores. Team 1 scored 21.8%. Team 2 scored 32.7% of points, Team 3 scored 10.9% of points, and Team 4 scored 34.5% of points. So now you've just, described basically what's going on in this chart. Now, there are situations where if you have a gazillion data points, it's not going to be effective or, time effective to describe each point like I just did. So you can say just kind of the general trend of the graph. So if this pie chart, for example, had like a lot more data points, but Team 4 had still scored the biggest amount of points, I would say, here's a pie chart. There's a lot of information here, but we can see that Team 4 scored the most amount of points and Team 3 scored the least amount of points. So you just kind of want to identify the pieces of information that are important, and then make sure that you're communicating those verbally and not just pointing them out visually. And that will make sure that everybody has full access to, the information that you're trying to describe. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. I just want to remind you, hopefully as COVID dies down and we're able to start having in-person events again, that you should continue to have a virtual event option when you have in-person events. Like I was saying earlier, there's a lot of folks who aren't going to be able to make it out to in-person events for a variety of reasons. So having that virtual option will really improve engagement with your event. And, I hope that when you do continue having virtual events, that you will use these tips and tricks and that you will be able to facilitate an event that really is engaging and meaningful and inclusive of everyone. Thank you so much.